Okay, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Redmond Historical Society Saturday Speaker Series. So lovely to see all your shining, smiling faces. Hope you all had a good summer. I'm Laura Lee Bennett. I'm the Society's Vice President and Program Committee Chair. We hope you enjoy our first program of the fall 2023 season, Letitia Whitehall murder, a 97-year-old cold case with local historian Tom Hitzroth. First, we'd like to know, how did you hear about today's program? Raise your hand. Newsletter, community calendars, social media, press release. Okay, looks like the press release needs some work. Well, thank you for letting me share that. And how many of you have heard of the Letitia Whitehall cold case? Oh, we have some people in the front row here. Yay, thank you, welcome.
I didn't do it.
Okay, we know you did. And today's presentation will take the better part of an hour. So please hold any questions you have until the end of the program. We'll have the lovely and talented Mary Horvick coming around with a microphone to take your questions after the presentation. A few announcements. Welcome new business member H&N International, originally poultry breeder Highstorm and Nelson, with operations in Kirkland, Woodville, and later in Redmond. You may have all heard of H&N. So welcome, remember. Yeah. Hey, it's great to be a business member of the society. It's wonderful. Welcome another new business member, Victor's Coffee. Yes. Yay! Victor's Coffee and Roasters, who's providing our hot beverages today. Thank you. I also want to thank Mary Sullivan and Cynthia Olson of Compass Realty, who are providing tasty treats for today, and they bake them all themselves, prepare them all themselves. So check that out, give them a clap. And if you're buying or selling a home, talk to them after the program. They have arrangements to work with you and help that out. And also, finally, but not leastly, I think I just committed verbicide. Thank you, volunteer coordinator Joanne Potter. Are you in the room, Joanne? And the team of volunteers from the Society for helping out with today's program. The chair set up coffee, membership, and AV support. Yeah, where's John Davidson? Yeah, thanks John for helping us with the camp. Yeah, our recording today is, we learn as we go, right? That's the lovely thing about the human brain, right? So bear with us as we encounter the next thing. And one final set of announcements. Come back on October 14th for the Redmond Poet Laureate Laura Day. She's almost to the end of her laureateship, which ends in December, but she will be presenting, doing a reading and performance for us and talking about poetry and place in Cascadia. And then at the Redmond Library on Wednesday, October 18th in the evening, we will have the Mohai public historian and author Lorraine McConaughey, who will be giving a workshop at the Redmond Library on how to be your own historian. And we're pretty excited about that. We're partnering with the Redmond Library and Friends of the Redmond Library on that one. So that's all I have to say for now, and I'm going to turn the mic over to the lovely and talented Holly Turner, our admin and collections manager. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura Lee. Now, before we begin today's presentation, we would like to acknowledge that we are on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, who continue to steward these lands and waters as they have since time immemorial. We recognize Washington's tribal and indigenous or native organizations, which actively create, shape, and contribute to our thriving communities. The Redmond Historical Society is committed to doing our part to engage with and amplify the voices of Native peoples and tribes. And now, to introduce our speaker, Tom Hitzroth. Tom is a friend and colleague of the Redmond Historical Society. He leads our walking tours every summer and fall, proofreads and fact checks our newsletter. Tom also contributes a local history column to the Redmond Recorder, the Redmond Historical Society's newsletter, of course, and leads walking tours of the historic downtown. In fact, there's very little that Tom doesn't know about the town in its early days up until the 1930s. In November 2020, Tom received the John D. Spellman Historic Preservation Award from King County in the Preservation Leadership category for exemplary achievement in chairing the King County Landmarks Commission and for serving as a key historian and forensic preservation investigator in East King County. Tom is a master storyteller. We hope you'll enjoy this fascinating program about the tragic slaying of a young girl that made the front pages of the newspapers for 6 months. Welcome, Tom.
I'm told I get to wear this leash. I hope it works. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. Well, the fun part of today is I have to distill 26 years into 1 hour. Anyway, when I selected the title for this, I called it a cold case because that's what they call it. However, I would have been more prone to call it not cold, but glacial. Because after 97 years, we are getting closer to a lot of things, but once we get into this, we're going to be primarily talking about her. The trial of Dr. Dobbs at the end of it is going to be very brief, but very much hitting the highlights of what happened at that trial. So, for 22 years, I also judged the local and state finals of History Day. And I was walking out the door in September of 1997 with a gentleman by the name of Alan Stein. Mostly people might know him from HistoryLink. But he had just finished indexing the entire East Side Journal from beginning to end, which is the magnum opus of this kind of research and investigation. And what he contributed has been extremely valuable in using the East Side Journal as a quick reference, instead of having to go through 1918 and 1974 to find out what it is you're looking for. Anyhow, we were walking out of the program together that day, and he looked at me and he said, "You do investigations, try this." And I said, "Who is it?" He said, "Letitia Whitehall." I said, "Who's she?" And so he hands me a newspaper clipping, one of the many. And my first thought was, where am I going to find anything on this? Turns out she is the prototype of all the work I did on the Coleman one I talked to you guys about a long time ago. She became the model for that one. But anyway, today I have 3 feet of documentation. This is the only place where the investigative reports, the coroner's inquest, anything left from the King County courthouse are all located in one spot. So, over the years, I've been visited by Dr. Chester Dobbs' grandchildren. He's the man accused of the crime. We're going to talk about that. Mrs. Whitehall's family, they wanted to get their oar on the pond about the Whitehalls. And in 2021, Letitia's grandnephew and great-grandniece came to the house. So it's been 17 years since I've done this presentation. And I want to thank everybody who's been a big hand in helping me, because the last time I did this, we were still using an overhead projector. You know, transparencies, that primitive communication device. And during the Kirkland Centennial celebration in 2005, they made a CD for their celebration of becoming incorporated. And Letitia became segment 9 of their history. They did a significant event for each month, and she became segment 9. This is also the only one I've ever kept a journal on, other than normal investigative notes. So there's 3 volumes here of notes. Half of this is not even in that 3 feet. But these are the only ones I've kept because Letitia got to be special because she was murdered on my birthday. And Saturday was October 30th, both times.
You're 97.
I'm working on it. I'm working on it. Right now, I just have a good makeup artist. Anyway, I got this many interviews. I got 24 interviews with 19 people. All of them either knew her or were familiar with the case. So up here we have Lorraine Kells Lampert. If anybody knows who Roy Lampert is, that's his wife. She is Dr. Dobbs's niece. And she's going to figure in this narrative. I also got a hold of the Sundholms, because there was an activity going on that night. Then this is Kathleen Whitehall, Letitia's younger sister. I got 2 interviews with her when she wouldn't give interviews to anybody else. She was an interesting character. Then I got Bonnie Dobbs, Dr. Dobbs's daughter. And then I'm just throwing in Maisie Lindsay for 2 reasons. One, she's Larry Nelson's aunt. And number 2, she brought up some stuff we'd never heard of and was nowhere in the literature. And we're going to talk about that. At the time of the interview, Cecil Whitehall up here was 85, Kathleen was 85, Bonnie was 93. And Maisie Lindsay was 96. Now, normally one wonders, does trails go dim with age? We all know that. Anybody with gray hair knows that. These gals and people could not tell you what they ate for breakfast 2 days ago, but their memories of this were crystal clear, because they were still living it. These people, in a way, the Ronald Whitehall and Jessica Hempel, are great-grand nieces and nephews, and they told me this subject is still not discussed in the family. Everybody on this list, if you're looking at victims, they all are, because they're all still living with it. Though I have to admit, all but 4 names on the list have already crossed over to the undiscovered country. So getting a chance to talk to them now, you're going to have to go there. They're not going to come here. But anyway, so Letitia Rosemary Whitehall, born January 15th, 1912 in Uncas, Washington. Uncas is as big as the word. When you look at it on the map, you can go through Uncas in 1/10 of a mile. But in those days, it was a logging community. They were doing a lot of logging in Jefferson County out that way. They moved to Redmond in 1921, lived on Union Hill. Letitia attended Redmond Elementary School, this one, from 1921 to 1925, which would mean she went to both the Anderson Park one and this one. This was given to me by Jeanette Smith, who was a daughter of Letitia's brother. Whoops. I'm not mechanically inclined in case anybody's going to learn. This is Letitia in Uncas, age 3. Mrs. Whitehall, and this is her older brother, Arthur, who also figures in this in a very interesting way. This was taken on Union Hill. In the photograph are Letitia, William, Mrs. Whitehall, and then this is Kathleen and Cecil. Those are the two I got to talk to. And I drove all the way to Woodburn, Oregon to talk to him. And he was a really, really interesting character in his own right. And the one other thing I like about the gals I've run into here, they are feisty. These are the gals that you want to go out and have a cup of coffee with, because these gals don't take crap from nobody. Anyway, Letitia at the time was 14 years old, weighed 125 pounds. Dark, curly bobbed hair, medium complexion, blue eyes. She got up early every morning at 5:30, made her father's breakfast, packed his lunch, got him off to work, did the family washing every other day, attended school every day, and after school her duties were to help with the housework, help take care of the twins, and help with the evening meal. Mrs. Whitehall had twins in February of 1926, but she had scarlet fever as a child. And so at the time she had the twins, she was 38. And so Letitia's duties got elevated to help her out. And if you look at the description, she's essentially becoming the lady of the house at 14 years old. Her character. This was taken from a lot of different sources, most of them interviews. Georgia Sundholm said her character was the best and we thought well of her. Joseph Heiser, who was 4 years older than her, was her boyfriend for a while, with Mom's approval. And he said she was a tender-hearted, sensitive girl. The investigative report said that she didn't flirt, she was a very quiet girl. One of her schoolmates said she was a sweet kid, smiling, did so much for her family, friendly, outgoing, uncomplaining, and very attractive. Her brother had a different one. Always cheerful, happy, never knew her to disagree with anyone except one of the aunts that was a sourpuss and never happy. Evelyn Gilbert, who had an involvement here for a long time, remembered she was a beautiful girl. Frances McEvers, who was one of these gals that I'd love to spend some more time with, she was feisty. She was a sweet girl, a pretty girl. She was not one of the girls. She was not a tart, fast or wild. She didn't run with that group. Thora Hunt Sundholm said Letty was a shy, quiet girl. And her sister Kathleen said she was my buddy, my champion against my 3 brothers. She was my bedmate, and she was the sweetest thing on earth. That's who Letitia Whitehall was in the minds of a lot of people who knew her. Now this one is also taken up on Union Hill. This is George Whitehall, her father, and then we have William again, Cecil, and Kathleen. We have the photograph of Letitia here. This is taken at the school here. The difference is the 1934 changes, where you got the gymnasium and a few other elements added on. This is before then. So this wall is on the other side, right here. Used to be an outside wall, not a gym. This is an attendance record. I have the attendance records, the actual day-to-day attendance records. And you might recognize some other names in there too, but there's Letitia. The D stand, no, they only put these in for, if they showed up every day, they didn't put anything in. But the D stands for dropped. In those days, if a student missed 3 days in a row and nobody said anything, they were dropped from the rolls. When they came back, they had to start all over again. But in 1925-26, all the kids in the family caught scarlet fever. All of her brothers and sisters caught it. So they were down for quite some time. Her last day of school was March 23rd, 1926, when the family moved to Rose Hill. Note, Rose Hill is in the county in those days, which has a lot to do with how things are going to fall out. The investigator's file had several letters in it from her to friends in Redmond she missed very much. She wanted to come see them. She wanted them to come see her. She was very lonely for her schoolmates here in Redmond. But she also noted in there, and I don't know about young gals that much, I never had kids, but she was also talking about breaking the hearts of all the boys. But she was calling them sheiks. And it took me a while to figure out what that was. In 1921, Rudolph Valentino did The Sheik. Well, in September of 1926, The Son of the Sheik was released. Unfortunately for Mr. Valentino, posthumously. So I was surprised that that kind of word would enter the lingo of how gals described guys. This was taken at Rose Hill Elementary. Letitia is obviously right there. This is the first time we knew she wore glasses. And the principal and one of the instructors is Herman Vesper of more later. Then we have the one you've probably seen. This was taken on 11 days before she died. So as far as any formal photographs of her, this is the last one. Now the photograph was given to Marymore Museum by a gal named Mildred Thayer. That's Mildred Thayer. I knew her as Millie Smith when I worked with her at Marymore. And when I asked her about the murder, she said she didn't remember anything. But from the tone, I had the idea that it was either she didn't remember or she didn't want to remember. I mean, she's close enough in any way with the family to be standing next to her. And this was taken across the street from the Rose Hill Elementary School at the time. Now this is the Whitehall home in 1938. And when I showed this to Kathleen Whitehall, all she said was, I don't remember it being that nice. And it was on Sheffield Street, which is today 116th Avenue Northeast, up on Rose Hill. In 1926, the investigator described the home as an old one-story frame building with 2 or 3 lean-tos built on it, giving the place about 5 rooms, no bath. And the home is dirty and the place is in a rundown condition, which is pretty much what Kathleen was telling me. It was from that house that Letitia left for the dentist at 4 o'clock the afternoon of October 30th, 1926. Strangely enough, Dr. Dobbs was working on Saturday. Doctors today don't work that much on Saturday. Kathleen Whitehall told me that she saw Letitia leave the house, saw her walk up the street on her way to the dentist, and as she was telling me, you could still see her see that moment. Because the look on her face and the sorrow in her voice at 85, she could still see that happening. She stopped on the way to the dentist at this home. It's a block north. The home of Helen Fisk, who was one of her best friends, and asked Helen if she could go to the dentist with her. If you read the investigators' reports, the number of assaults on high school and junior high age girls in Kirkland is staggering. Just staggering. It occupies 2 pages of the investigator's report, and he didn't cover all of it. So she asked Helen, can you go to the dentist with me? Helen said, Mom just left for the ferry landing. I got to watch the house. Sorry. So Letitia went on alone. This house, I told you it wasn't mechanically inclined. This house is now the southbound on-ramp to 405 from Northeast 85th. Fortunately, someone sent me some photographs of when they were building 405, and that house was still in the photograph before they demolished it. On her way to the dentist, about halfway to the dentist's office, Letitia's uncle, who had been at the Whitehall house most of the day, saw her on Piccadilly Avenue, which today we call 7th Avenue. Remember, the town was platted by an Englishman. So all the street names are Bond, Jersey, Piccadilly, you name it. And it wasn't until 1930 that they did away with named streets and moved to numbered streets in Kirkland. So I had to learn the whole town as it was then, because none of the references talk about the modern street names. So anyway, he gave her a ride to the dentist on Market Street, which means she got there earlier than she was expecting. So she had to wait because there was 3 people in front of her. So this is Dobbs's house. This is his office. This is a garage, right? Remember, Dobbs doesn't own a car. That's important later. So he put 2 pinhead-sized fillings in one of her teeth, which did not require an anesthetic. I spent 4.5 hours at the University of Washington Medical Library doing nothing but looking at the different types of anesthetic that were used in those days and what their properties were. In other words, do they dissolve? Do they dissolve completely? How do they react in solution? That's all I cared about. And knowing the family was poor, he didn't charge them for the visit. So Letitia left Dobbs's office about 5:25. Now, sundown that evening was 4:54 p.m. They went off daylight saving times on the 26th of September. So she arrived at daylight, but went home in the dark. This is the front of Dr. Dobbs's office. Letitia walked around the front of the house and right in here ran into Bonnie Dobbs and Lorraine Kells, who were coming back from the post office. They chatted for a little bit. Bonnie and Lorraine decided to go back to town before going to a Halloween party at the Kells home. And they followed Letitia down Market Street into town. And since Halloween fell on a Sunday in 1926, and there was no way Halloween was going to be celebrated on a Sunday, everything was Saturday. So the first problem I had was to figure out which is Halloween and which isn't Halloween. Because in those days, if you didn't have the treat, what? You got the trick. So anyway, and this one's going to be important, keep it in the back of your mind. Who saw Letitia after she left Dobbs' office? This is important later. Bonnie and Lorraine saw her, Jenny Gilbert and Elmer Gilbert saw her, and Lois Coleman saw her. Bonnie and Lorraine, both aged 14, tried to tell the authorities what they saw, but were ignored. Why? Because back in those days, a 14-year-old kid wasn't really thought to have much of a brain. Now the cops will interview a kid anytime they can. Why? Because the kid doesn't have the filters we have. They don't have that life experience that allows us to throw something in that wasn't there, or may not have been there, or isn't quite that way. A kid will tell you straight. At least I'm thinking that's why, never having had kids. Most of the people I talk to, they never had trouble with their kids telling them straight. But anyway, so the Gilberts, and the Gilberts are credentialed. These people have been here since beginning of Kirkland. They owned the first major hotel in town. They are very well placed in the community. So the Gilberts told investigators they saw two girls walking past their home behind another girl. They did not know who had bobbed, or one of the girls they knew who they didn't know had bobbed hair. Investigators told them they were not to talk further about this. Lois Coleman told her story to the town marshal, Clem Egbert, who told the sheriff. The sheriff came to visit Mrs. Coleman. She wasn't home, and no attempt was ever made again to contact her. This is the Gilberts' house in 1938. As the three of them were walking down Market Street, Lorraine Kells took a leaf off of a tree, and the Gilberts are sitting on their porch defending their property for Halloween. And Mrs. Gilbert goes nuts, according to Bonnie Dobbs. So both of them stop, and then Letitia, who is just ahead of them, stops to look around and see where the noise came from. And then they went on a little distance ahead but let Letitia walk farther ahead because Letitia didn't run in their circles either. So for those of us who have been here long enough, I actually still remember that building before they tore it down. But this is the Gilbert homes. Letitia was walking down this street ahead of them. They stayed just far enough behind that she turned the corner onto Lake Avenue. The two girls continued walking behind her, and then when they rounded the corner, they darn near walked into her because she had stopped to get something out of her purse. And so at that point, Bonnie and Lorraine left the scene, and Letitia carried on. So there's Dobbs's house. They come down the street. Photo you just saw is that corner that's missing. Letitia walked along this side of the street to here and then turned to down this part of the street and then eventually went up Kirkland Avenue. This is a photo of Lake Avenue in 1925 or 26. The reason I wanted to get this photo is I wanted to see what she saw that night. Not what is there now, but what she would have seen. Because I actually walked that route that she was taking that night 3 times. And I figured the timings were probably pretty good because she's a 14-year-old girl wearing pumps and I'm 54 and out of shape. So I figured it was kind of an even deal there. But she walked home down this side of the street. And I was able to relocate where the photographer was standing when he shot this photo. So what do we have? In 1926, the Sanborn Fire Insurance Company, who makes maps for buildings of commercial value, updated both Redmond and Kirkland both in 1926. So whatever I was getting was 100% accurate. So we have Wickenkamp's drugstore, the barber shop, the Rose Beauty Salon, and the post office. This seemed to be where Lorraine was going that night, Bonnie was going that night, and Dr. Dobbs was going to go that night because the post office on Saturday closed at 6. And they're behind the 8 ball getting down there before it closes. This is the Rose Beauty Shop. I found a photo that actually had it in it. This is where Mr. and Mrs. Coleman and their daughter was standing when they saw a girl on the other side of the street. Wickenkamp's drugstore is right here. Now this is across the street. How many of us remember that building before it burned? About 1974? So this is where Pratt's Barber Shop is right here. There's the barber pole. Now, also it has a street light. But Lois Coleman said she saw this girl by the shop windows. However, since the street lights didn't come on until 5:30 that night, we know that Letitia had to be in front of that building before 5:30. She described the girl standing in front of her as a robust young girl, about 14 or 15. She had no hat, quantities of dark fluffy hair, wore a green blazer sweater, dark skirt, light stockings, low black shoes. And this description matches Letitia's hairstyle, how she was dressed that evening, and the clothing inventory taken at the coroner's office because she was found wearing those clothes. Here in the previous one we talked about her purse, here we talk about her shoes, neither of which were ever found. This is the other important slide. Who saw Dr. Dobbs after Letitia left the office? Well, of course, Bonnie and Lorraine saw him. Ralph Dobbs showed up for a few minutes, but Dr. Dobbs was on his way to try to get to the post office before it closed, so the conversation was pretty brief. Herman Vesper, the principal of the school. The town marshal saw him at 6 o'clock, Wickenkamp's drugstore. buying magazines. He also made a phone call from there to his wife to see if there's anything she needed for the Halloween party. At 8 o'clock, Marshal Egbert saw him again in town. 9 o'clock, Mrs. John Dale, who was just a bystander in the event, she walked up Market Street at 9 o'clock and saw Dobbs reading magazines in the front room of his house. So this is where we're at for the background. Who she is, where she was, what they were doing, and for those people who are interested in trivia, she had bobbed hair, right? Well, in 1924, a silent screen star named Colleen Moore got her hair bobbed, and every gal that could thought about it, entire across the United States, started bobbing their hair. She's the one that started it. So that's your trivial thing for today. So, now we get to the Kenmore Bridge. So we're on Lake Sammamish looking east. This is the old Kenmore Bridge. Everybody remembers the cement one? Few people might remember the old one. Up until recently, I believe the pilings here were still visible under the bridge at low water. So you knew exactly how wide it was and where it was located. This photograph was taken about 1915. The body was found, Letitia's body was found, as I said, I'm not mechanically inclined, just off frame here. Two duck hunters were going up the river to hunt ducks and saw what they thought they saw was a dead dog. So they kept on going. They came back the next day and that object hadn't moved. So they rowed over to it and found Letitia Whitehall in the river at that spot. And in the 2 weeks she had been in the river, it was not a sight anybody would really want to see. That's where I really have the greatest respect for coroners and medical examiners. So, what happened on the bridge that night? Right along here. Two people, Mrs. Mabel Tweeter and her brother Arthur Turner, were traveling this direction on the bridge when coming toward them was a set of headlights, and then the guy pulled a U-turn in the middle of the bridge. So they had to stop and wait for him because he was probably making a three-point left turn or U-turn with that kind of a vehicle. So when he had finally completed his move, they continued on. So when Mrs. Tweeter passed the driver's side of that car, she only was 3 or 4 feet from that person. And she was asked at the trial by the deputy coroner if the person in the courtroom every day was on that bridge, and she said yes, he's the one that had his hand over the face of the limp form of a girl. And she identified George Whitehall. Well, in later times, Nathan Baker, who was the prosecuting attorney's investigator, went to Mrs. Tweeter twice and asked if she would change her mind and say it was Dr. Dobbs. At the autopsy, it was noticed that her left bicuspid was missing. The prosecution averred that it was a tooth extraction, no matter what Dobbs said about him having extracted no teeth. And the prosecutor held to the fact that Dr. Dobbs had extracted a tooth. All the medical people, the coroner, the deputy coroner, said it was knocked out by the blow to a jaw. And when I put together what the coroner's inquest was saying, I had figured that out a year before. To me, this was just confirmation that I was tracking the right way. It was their opinion that when he pitched her off the bridge, whoever it was, she hit one of those stringers going over, and that's where the tooth popped out. Now, let's go back and talk about Maisie Lindstein again. Maisie Lindstein, and this is why I'm saying everybody on that list you saw earlier is a victim. She told me, and this was the first time anybody had heard of it, Letitia had asked her to go to the dentist with her that night. And she couldn't go either. And Maisie told me that every time since 1926, up to her death at 100 years old, that she crossed that bridge, she always wondered that if she had been able to go with Letitia that night, would it have made a difference? At 96, she was still brokenhearted about that. So, now we come to the trial of Dr. Dobbs. That photograph, which is from the Seattle Star, which for the most part was the Globe and National Enquirer of the four major newspapers in town, they truly believed that they never let the facts get in the way of a good story. This is the actual photo it was made from. When the Seattle Star closed up shop and they disposed of all of their material, this was picked up about 9 years ago on an eBay auction. But this is the photo that was made from, the actual photo. It's got all the stuff on the back and everything. Prosecuting attorney Colvin insisted over the statements of the Gilberts, Coleman, Mabel Tweeder, that Dobbs was the last person to see her alive. Now, Dr. Dobbs himself, during the trial, was his own worst enemy, too. He would come into the courtroom, he would be smiling, he would be in a good mood, he would greet people that he knew. Juries don't like that. The legal system doesn't like it either. Because, first of all, people often believe that they should be feeling how I would feel in that situation, which isn't necessarily true. But what it took me a couple of years to figure out was that Dobbs wasn't being flippant. Don't take the appearance of ambivalence as confidence. He knows he didn't do it. He knows that they're going to figure that out. But he also believes that the system works as advertised. So, there's his arrest warrant for first-degree murder. They set the bail at $25,000. 15 citizens and most all the businesses in Kirkland put their entire assets up as surety for that, because they believed he didn't do it. There was over 80 local citizens and businesses in Kirkland that contributed to a reward to find the murderer. But they never for a moment believed Dobbs did it. This is her burial record. I tried to be as thorough as I could. She was buried November 1926. On December 1926, they exhumed the body. During the coroner's inquest, and the investigation. But April 27 was during the trial. And the second exhumation proved one of the most controversial parts of this trial. Of the 28-page instructions to the jury by Judge Moriarty, 1 page alone was dedicated solely to the exhumation. In the second exhumation, the prosecuting attorney did not inform Dobbs's lawyer, did not inform the Whitehalls, did not inform the trial court of his intention to do it, and he did not obtain a court order to do it. The superintendent of Calvary Cemetery testified he was reluctant to allow the exhumation, but felt that he had no choice. In the instructions, it states, where during the process of a trial a body is exhumed by one of the parties to the action without notice to the other party, or without notice to or the knowledge of the trial court, and an exhumation is made of such body without notice or knowledge on the part of the other party to the action, testimony as to the discoveries made and things disclosed by such examination should be very cautiously received. The trial went on. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Trial went on. The jury retired at 5:31 in the evening. They did not ask for their court-authorized dinner. "46 minutes later, they came back in and said he's not guilty. Says here the jury frees Dobbs on second ballot. The PI said on the first one. I think they were only there long enough to make it look like they were doing something. Because the newspaper reported that while they were waiting for the jury's deliberation, they were outside in that little park next to the courthouse where they have that monument to the Battle of Seattle. And one of the jurors looked down on Dobbs and just smiled. They knew they weren't going to be there very long. Dobbs' only comment after 3 weeks of trial was, "That's that." Shook hands with the jury and walked out of the building. Never said a word to anybody else. Well, after that, the defense attorney, George Crandall, made it very clear in public notice that he believed that Colding had framed Dobbs, which is pretty strong language for a prosecuting attorney. But he summarized his concerns in writing. The involvement of a private investigator, Nathan Baker, instead of his own staff, and the sheriff was never at the trial. Nathan Baker was a PI. Now, granted, the prosecuting attorney can have anybody he wants sit up there in the courtroom with him. But I always wondered why a PI. Bonnie Dobbs told me why. Nathan Baker would walk into their house, never knock, walk in, take what he wanted, and walk out and never say a word. A PI is not an officer of the court. And he is not an officer of the law. The only thing a PI essentially cannot do in the process of their investigations is break a law. Now, if you have something he's looking for, he can't knock in the window of your car to get it. But if you left the window open, he could take it and nobody would say a word. It was convenient to have a PI in this investigation. When I talked to Bonnie Dobbs, very first word after "good morning, ma'am" was, "Do you know Nathan Baker?" And I said, "Yeah, I know who Nathan Baker is. He's a skunk," which I figured for a 93-year-old woman was about as profane as she was ever going to get. But that's when she told me how he treated them. He didn't need the warrants. He could just do it. But Crandall also wanted to know, where was the sheriff in all of this? He's the investigating officer. Sheriff was never there one day of those 3 weeks. Mrs. Tweeter testified in court that Nathan Baker had come to her twice to say, he said, get her to change her mind and say it was Dr. Dobbs. He came to her twice, once in her own home. Then we had what forensic evidence was available during that time. From the first autopsy, the prosecuting attorney sent whatever it was he sent to the head of the chemistry department at Washington State College. That's what it was called in 1926. And Dr. Todd wrote him and said, I didn't find any Novocaine. So Colvin took it to the head of the chemistry department at the University of Washington, and he said, I did find Novocaine. Crandall obtained somehow a letter that the prosecutor sent back to Dr. Todd and said, can I show you Dr. Dane's report? Maybe you'll change your mind. Todd wrote back a caustic letter that says, not only will I not look at it, it would be unethical for me to look at it. Colvin had a tendency to want to hold on to witnesses' even after they had been impeached in cross-examination. He disregarded possible witnesses who saw Letitia after she left the dentist's office, and their testimony was of no value, or as he told Mrs. Tweeter, isn't it true that you're upset with me because I told you you were mistaken? Her response to that's why I like feisty old ladies, because she had just been called a liar twice in 15 minutes, and she didn't take it well and let him know about it. The questionable exhumation. I've never heard of this before, but Crandall, the defense attorney, subpoenaed the prosecutor. And the prosecutor took the stand. And Crandall grilled him, did whatever he was going to do, and then Moriarty says, you can go. Now, what do you think happened? Colvin said, but I have the right of cross-examination. Which he does. But it put Moriarty in a kind of a bad position. Who cross-examines the prosecuting attorney? Now, who would you think it would be? Some people thought the deputy prosecutor. But The prosecuting attorney allowed him to cross-examine himself. And the newspapers, which I don't have a great deal of respect for, said that there was twittering going on through the whole gallery as people suddenly realized where this was going, because Crandall and Colvin fought constantly. I think if Moriarty could have torn his hair out by the roots, he would have by the end of the trial. And there was one other thing. Nathan Baker works for Luke May. Now, Luke May is a biggie. He was working with silver nitrate solutions to identify hair in 1923. He invented a comparison microscope. He was dealing with fingerprints on a forensic level that nobody in the country was doing at the time. They called him in as a consultant for the St. Valentine's Day Massacre and the Lindbergh kidnapping. So this guy is no slouch. But Crandall wanted to know why Luke May took $50 from George Whitehall to go find the murderer of his daughter. Isn't that what Nathan Baker's doing? And who is employing Nathan Baker? Is the county employing him, or is May employing him? When I mentioned this $50 to Kathleen Whitehall, her face just changed. And she wasn't thinking about Dad giving $50 to Luke May. She was concerned about the fact that there were 7 kids in that family. In those days, that $50 would have bought $850 worth of stuff. That's what she was thinking. The food, the clothes, everything. She was not amused with that. So we see how it sort of falls out here that is anybody ever going to really know who did it? No. Okay, postscript. Kathleen Whitehall died on June 24th, 2020 at the age of 101. In fact, she was 2 months short of 102. When she found out that I had put a brick out in front of the Heritage Hall in Kirkland for Letitia because she had no headstone, she decided that she wanted to put a headstone up to both Letitia and her mother. The family couldn't afford headstones when both of these people had passed away. And her niece, Jeanette, offered to throw in with her on the headstones, and Kathleen said that it was her responsibility to do, and so that she would do it on her own. Bonnie Dobbs died on November 3rd, 2006, at the age of 94. And I interviewed her twice. And when we were done, I gave her some documentation about her father and the trial. And I have absolutely no doubt that she never knew I left the room. Her granddaughter came up to me later and said that this had been good for her because she knew that in 1926 and 27, when she had tried to tell the authorities her story, she was never allowed to. And she knew I would believe her. And her granddaughter said she finally got to tell the story she has been trying to tell for the last 90 years. So when I left the house after the second interview, I had this thought in my mind that if anything I did helped these two ladies cross over the Great Divide any better, then 3 feet of paper didn't mean anything. This is the headstone that Kathleen put up for her sister. And this is right after the headstone had been installed. These are a lot of the investigative resources that I chose to review. And this is the first time, as I said earlier, that many of these documents have been collected all in one place so that documents could be compared against each other and a better, fuller picture of what happened be developed. So we have the University of Washington School of Medicine, the interviews, the coroner's inquest transcript, what's left of the court case at the King County Courthouse, the investigation files of Luke May, whose company investigated the crime, and the coroner's scrapbook, and many other documents here that were needed to pull all of this together in one place to try to figure out what happened and in what order. I'd like to give credit to these 4 people who did a lot more for me in creating this presentation. Laura Lee Bennett, who held my hand through the PowerPoint process and bought off on the final flow of the presentation, because the last time I gave this presentation, we were still using an overhead projector and transparencies 17 years ago. Cara Downing, who gave me a lot of ideas and probably never knew she was giving them to me. Dean Jowers, who gave me a lot of input and a lot of review of the documentation that I had and gave me some offerings of his thoughts. And Paige Norman, who also reviewed it for the same reason and gave me a lot of ideas or asked a lot of really good questions about various aspects of it that helped clarify a lot of the information that I've given you today.